Rabbi.
Morning. Okay. Hi, everybody. Why don't we get started? I'd just like to go back to this halacha that we were learning yesterday about hiring a laborer. Let me just close my door. I just also wanted to express our thanks to our sponsors today, Ron Becker in honor of Carla, and also Alan Mall in the commemoration of the yard sites of both his grandmother and his father of blessed memory. And we also, I was informed of a third sponsor for this week, which is David and Helen Spiegelman on the yard site of David's mother, Grace Spiegelman, which was yesterday. So we thank them for that. But what I wanted to point out is that we were learning yesterday about this concept of hiring a laborer. When you hire a laborer, if there's only a verbal or oral commitment between the two parties, we learned yesterday that either party is allowed to withdraw from that deal, even in the middle of the job. If there's a desire for either party to back out, then there's permission is granted, and the reason why it is permissible to back out of this contract, as in the words of the Imrei Yaakov, sheyochel lomar habalabayis lepoel hasker atzmecha b'makom acher, because the employer can always tell the laborer, go find work somewhere else. Work is readily available. There's no reason that you have to now sit home idly, because work is readily available. And similarly, and similarly, the laborer is able to tell the employer, there are plenty of guys who are capable of doing this job. And you have to be able to make that argument in order to have a clean conscience and a legal right to be able to back out of a commitment that you've already made. Ella sheyesh al hachozer tarumos shegorem torach. He says there is a legitimate grievance that the other party has if the other party backs out, because you've caused me inconvenience. You've caused me the inconvenience of having to put my stuff in my trunk or my bag in order to be able to come over to your house. And but now that you've notified me that you no longer need my services, I can easily hire myself out to someone else for the day. No loss, no foul, and therefore either party can back out. Is there a mechusar amana? Yes, there is still a mechusar amana according to some parties. According to other parties, there's not even a mechusar amana, as long as everyone can go on with their day productively and no one has incurred a loss. Now, the source of this, the Imrei Yaakov at the end of this said, I refer you to later on in the Rav Shulchan Aruch in Siman Yud Aleph, which would take us years to get there. So I wanted to just read the text for you in the Rav Shulchan Aruch, which is the laws of She'ela and Schirus, the laws of borrowing and the laws of hiring or renting or leasing. And so in the course of that set of halachos, the Rav Shulchan Aruch. Let me just bring up that screen. Here it is. And he writes as follows. Poel ha'oved lebal habayis. I hope everyone can see the screen. I'm up in the Bar Ilan CD. If a laborer is working for an employer, bein b'schiras lizman, bein b'kablanus, and it doesn't matter whether it's a by the hour or by the day employee, or whether he's hired for the job, let's say to build him a cabinet or to do a delivery for him. Afilu kibel kvar kol secharo yachol lachzor bo be'emtza pulaso. Even if he's already been paid in advance, the employee, the laborer, is allowed to stop work even in the middle of the job, but under the following condition. Im eino gorem shum hefsid lebal habayis, provided that the employer does not incur loss. In other words, if the balabayas incurs loss because I've hired you to drive a delivery from Toronto to Vancouver, and you decide in the middle of the delivery that you've had enough, so somewhere in the middle of Manitoba or Alberta, you decide to just park the truck on the side of the street and walk away, that's considerable loss to the balabayas. So an employee does not have the rights to do that. But let's say the balabayas can easily find someone to take over the drive without incurring any loss or any interruption in the delivery process. Then an employee does have a legal right to back out and say, here, I'm returning the money that you hired me for. You can just pay me for the days that I've worked, and you can pay my friend or some other guy that I'll refer you to, or that you can easily find to resume the drive. Shenamar, as it says, Ki li b'nei Yisrael avadim, avadaihem, v'lo avadim la'avadim, sheyavdu shelo birtzanam, machmas shekvar niskeru. Now, it's very important to understand the principle behind this halacha. Why is it that the halacha is so accommodating to the breakage of a labor contract? The reason why the halacha is so accommodating to the breaking of a labor contract is because the Torah says that I do not want the Jewish people to be slaves. The Jewish people are my slaves, says God. They're not meant to be slaves to other human beings. So the Torah is leaning over backwards to tell you that no one should feel this sense of being indentured to somebody else because they've entered into a contract of labor. If for whatever reason you need to walk out of that contract, and as long as the other party can be made whole without incurring a loss, then everyone has a right to walk out of a labor contract, because there's a concern that people should not feel that sense of slavery. And it's almost like someone who was traumatized in their past. They have triggers, right, because of that past trauma. The Jewish people's trauma collectively is that we were slaves in Egypt. That's the origin of our people. And therefore, the Torah, excuse me, and the halacha are very sensitive to that trauma, and we don't want to trigger that trauma of making any Jew feel like a slave. And so therefore, as long as you can ensure that the other party does not incur a loss through your walking away from a contract, the halacha gives you permission to do so. V'lachein, and therefore, let's see the practical application. Yesh mi she'omer she'ein lepoel o melamed o mishares lahaskir atzmo lios beves bal habayis echad bekeva yoser mishalosh shanim. He says there's even an opinion that says that based upon this, an employee or a teacher or a let's say a maid or a butler should not enter into a work contract where they live in the house of the employer for longer than 3 years. In other words, a service contract should not be longer than 3 years, but only when the service contract is such where the laborer is living with the employer, because then it looks like a type of slavery. Because kiad shalosh shanim nikra sachir, because up until 3 years, you don't have the appearance of being an indentured servant. You just have the appearance of being a laborer. Kemo shekasuf b'Yeshaya, b'shalosh shanim kishnei sachir v'nikla v'gomer. That Isaiah makes reference to the fact that a laborer typically works a contract of up to 3 years. But uve'eved ivri ne'amar, ki mishne sachar sachir, avodecha sheish shanim. That the definition of a Hebrew slave who works for 6 years and goes free on the 7th is that he's working twice the amount of a laborer, of someone who's hired to do a job. And that's why it's called Mishneh Sachar Sachir, the doubling of the contract with a Sachir, with a day laborer, is when he works for you for 6 years. Uviyoser mishalosh shanim yatsa michlal Sachir v'nichnas bichlal Eved, v'haTorah amra ki li b'nei shel avodim avodayim v'lo avodim la'avodim. He says, and that's the basis, is that once you start working for longer than 3 years and you're working in the house of the employer, you already start to gain the appearance of a slave, and that's what the Torah says we don't want you to do. We don't want you to be slaves to other people, because the Jewish people are only servants of God. They're not servants of human beings. Umikol makom, but nonetheless, im ein lo ma yochal, rashai afil limkor atzmo be'eved bizman shahayovel nohe. But then he says, but if a person doesn't have food, the Torah does grant one permission even to sell oneself into indentured slavery, and we're not going to get into that right now. In any event, I just wanted you to see that halacha as it appears in the Rav Shulchan Aruch, as far as the permissibility to exit a labor contract, that is, it is predicated upon the trauma of slavery, or the concern that someone should not feel like they are enslaved to their job. I know that there are certain industries where you enter into a work contract and sometimes you feel like a slave. But I also wanted to show you the Imrei Yaakov on that halacha. So I'm just bringing it up in the Otzar HaChachma, where, let's see. If you take a look, this is the text of the Imrei Yaakov on that halacha. It's in this small box over here on the right side. There's a tremendous amount of commentary in the Biurim on different case histories. It goes on for pages. So fortunately, we're not going to see that today. But I just wanted to show you the Imrei Yaakov, which is just the simple explanation. Poel ha'oved. If you have a day laborer, someone that you hire for an hourly wage or a salary, he says, Kaimulon de balabaya shesochar poel. We paskin that if an employer hires a laborer, beli kinyan rak bedibor, without any formal transaction, but just an oral contract, eze mehen shebo lachzer harishus biyado. Then whichever party wants to withdraw from the contract, from the oral contract, each one has permission. Sheyachol lomar habalabayis lepol hasker atzmecha b'makom acher, v'chein apol yachol lomar lebalabayis tzei uschor lecha poel acher. He says it's the same language. It's the language that's based on the Gemara, that the balabayis can say to the laborer, it's easy for you to find work somewhere else. Just put yourself back into circulation and someone else will hire you. And, so you have to say that what we're talking about is a type of unskilled labor such that it's very easy to find another person to do it, whether it's hoeing agriculturally, or whether it's acting as a messenger to drive a truck or whatever it is. These are considered to be, I guess, and there's no pejorative meant, but it's called unskilled labor in the sense that the laborers are readily available and the employers are readily available. And similarly, the laborer can say to the balabas that if he wants to back out, there's plenty of guys like me that you can hire. Ella sheyesh al hachozer tar umos, but there is recrimination that the other party, the aggrieved party, has on the party who withdraws from the deal, because it's going to involve some level of inconvenience for me to have to find somebody else. And furthermore, I do have you've inconvenienced me, and furthermore, you're mechusar amana. You don't hold to your word. He says, and the only time that there can be this recrimination is when there's no legitimate reason for the person to back out of the deal. But if a person comes with a legitimate explanation as to why they have to withdraw from the contract, let's say an employer hires a laborer to transport a certain piece of merchandise from point A to point B. And then while the merchandise is in transport, the employer realizes, hey, I've just sold the merchandise. There's no reason to schlep it to that other place to sell it. I've already sold it. So I don't need you to schlep it any further. You can bring it back. Vahapoel motzei lihistaker. And the driver that I've hired can always find work somewhere else because he's an in-demand driver. So ein lo shum tar umas. So in that situation, even recriminations is not something. In other words, no one should feel bad in that kind of scenario where there's a very strong and legitimate argument as to why I don't need you to do that work anymore. Remember, we had seen that, we had also seen a similar case where a guy was interested in purchasing a piece of merchandise. The case that we were dealing with was an olive press or a wine press. And he was negotiating with a guy, and they had made a deal that the sale would go through at a certain price. And then the buyer all of a sudden inherited an olive press from his deceased brother and doesn't need to buy the olive press anymore. Again, it all depends on the scenario. If there's a very strong and legitimate reason why a person has to withdraw from an oral contract, then sometimes there can be no recriminations at all. And the Shach in his commentary to the Shulchan Aruch says that when a laborer can easily find work somewhere else, then when the employer withdraws from the contract, there can be no recriminations against him because the guy is not being inconvenienced at all. But if it has to be underscored, as the Rav Shulchan Aruch makes very clear, that there can be no financial claims against either party only when there's been no financial loss. No loss, no foul. But if there's been financial loss as a result of one of the parties pulling out of the contract, then clearly there are not only bad feelings and inconvenience, but there's also financial loss, and there are recriminations that can be litigated properly in a Beis Din. Let me just.
Can I ask a quick question about this?
Sure.
You can identify the amount of the loss. Can you pay that amount so that there's no recrimination and then you're even?
It would seem that way. Yeah, it would seem that first of all, you have to have a legitimate reason for needing to back out of the deal. You can't just do it willy-nilly. But if the laborer, let's say, is causing, you can identify the dollar amount of financial loss that the employer is going to incur by the guy withdrawing from the deal, then let him just pay that amount or take it out of the wages that he's already been entitled to.
This is kind of the question I was holding back from yesterday, but I guess if you engage someone for services and then you decide not to use them, can you just pay them for the amount of time they've spent on you, to avoid sort of the recrimination. So then they're whole again.
Well, again, you also have the recrimination is based on the fact that they may not be able to find work easily to cover the time that they've lost. It's not just the investment. In other words, let's say I hire a photographer, let's say for my child's wedding, and then I decide I don't want that photographer anymore. So he may say, well, number one, I had to purchase a certain type of equipment because of what you had requested for your photography, and I had to hire somebody to help me. So you have to cover those costs. But then there's another recrimination, which is he's booked off that date, and it's going to be difficult for him to now fill that date with productive work. That's the recrimination. Now, if it's so close to the booking, to the date of the wedding, that he's not going to be able to find another wedding to photograph on that day because it's already so close, it's like within a week. So then, not only is there verbal recrimination, but he can actually sue you because you've taken away from him his income for that day that he stood to earn, and it has to be weighed carefully. I had an interesting situation. We had my son when he was supposed to get married in Montreal in March, and he ended up not getting married in March in Montreal. He ended up getting married in a private wedding in LA because he flew out the bride right before they closed the border. So what happened was that we had booked someone to do music for us at the wedding in Montreal. And the person, we had put down a deposit, and the person said, not only should I be entitled to keep the deposit, but you should also pay me X additional because of the financial loss, because the guy that was going to be doing the singing could have hired himself out on that day, and because you blocked off that date, he can't hire himself out anymore to anyone else. So you should pay him as well, even though that's above and beyond what you put down for the deposit. So I told him initially. There were a lot of there was a lot of back and forth that we were discussing. It was all done very menschlich because he's a frum guy, and there was no reason to get upset about it, but he was just telling me how he felt. And so I said but at some point I said to him, when it became clear that there were not going to be any weddings on that day, so there's no longer that ability to make the claim, well, by you reserving this fellow, this wedding singer, he can't hire himself out, so you should pay for that loss of income. That there's no loss of income in that situation because there's a pandemic and he's not going to be able to gain work anywhere. But he said to me that there was another consideration, that this boy, the singer, is getting married and he needs some parnasa for his own. I said, you know what? I'm just going to take it out of my Meiser money and I'll pay you whatever you want, because it's Hachnasas Kala. I'm doing him the mitzvah of helping this boy get started on his marriage. But I just want you to know that I don't feel that I'm halachically obligated to provide this payment, because it's not like because he had committed to us, he had to give up other jobs. There are no other jobs that he could have gotten. So anyway, that was the feeling that I had. But it's based on this principle, right? Anyway,
there's also the story of the Reichmans when they built first Canadian place, and there was a Yom Tov. What they would do is they shut down the site and they'd pay all the workers anyway for the day.
Yeah, I think they did it even on Chol HaMoed, I was told. At least that's what I read.
Yeah. That's when I worked for them.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so Od nechleku haposkim b'haidina dehacha pol yochel lachzer be'emtza hazman. He says there's also a machlokus in the poskim. I'm sorry, excuse me. I jumped the gun. I'm sorry. Bein bekablanus yochel lachzer bo. So the Rav Shulchan Aruch had said that a laborer can back out on a job, whether he's being paid by the day or the hour, or whether he's being paid by the job. Being paid by the job is called kablanus. Let's say I hire someone to do a specific job for me, and I'm paying you for the job, not paying you by the hour. So that person can also back out. So he says, "Ayin bi'urim the divrei harav kan tzarachian, the das haposkin, who the davka polshu who sachir yom yachol lachzer bo mashenkin kablan ayin sham." He says because there are many poskim who say that you can only back out on when you're being paid by the day, and you can say, "Look, I'm being paid by the hour, by the day. I've decided to stop working, and you can hire somebody else." But if I'm being paid to complete a whole job, there are some poskim who say that you can't back out in the middle of the job, because then you're sort of the commitment that you made is to complete a work product, and so you can't stop in the middle of a halfway done work product. He says, "V'hinei hada kaimulan depol yochol lachzer bo b'chatzi hayom nechlugu bo haposkim igam heicha sha'asu kinyan amrinan kain." Now, all of this, as to advance this discussion, there's a machlokus in the poskim that when we say that a laborer is allowed to withdraw from his commitment, is that even in the middle of the day we allow him to do that? There's a machlokus as to whether that's true even when they've made a transactional kinyan, when they've actually shaken hands or signed a contract. The das haritva b'shem rabosav shelo amru shapol yochol lachzor bo ela b'maskir atzmo ba'amira bilvad. He says the Ritva, one of the Rishonim, says that the halacha that a laborer is allowed to back out on a contract is only when he orally commits, and that's all there's been is just an oral contract. Aval im nishtabed b'kinyan l'tfuye asa shlo yuchol lachzor bo. But when there's an actual contract signed or some other kind of transactional contract, so then he can't back out. And umeidach harivash svirlei deim l'chalek bazeh u'chol gavne yachol lachzor. He says, but the Rivash, who's another Rishon, says that even with a contract, we're sensitive to this idea of not becoming indentured. And therefore, even when there's a kinyan that was made between the two parties, either party can still back out, provided that there's no financial loss. V'chein hu das hashach, and this is the opinion of the shach as well. Od nechleku haposkim b'haydina, the hacha the pol yachol lachzer be'emtza hazman, ha'im ze nemar gam hecha shirotze lelech la'avod etzel balabayis acher. He says another dispute between the poskim is, can a laborer pull out of working from employer A if his reason is because he wants to work for employer B? The yesh omrim the af im holech mi balabayis ze v'niskar etzel acher. He says, some say that a laborer can do whatever he wants. He can say, listen, it's not because I need to go visit my ailing parents that I have to back out on the deal. I just don't want to work for you anymore. I'd rather work for the other guy. And he has a right to do that. And the reason being is that because he's not a slave. And because he's not a slave, he has the independence to decide for whom he will work. So therefore, what difference does it make what his reason for quitting on employer A, even if it's to go to work for somebody else? He has the right to do so. There's a lot of discussion. A guy who works for a .com, one of those major .com, I'm going to quit working for Facebook, I'm going to work for Microsoft, or I'm going to go work for Apple instead. This happens all the time in labor law, that really according to this opinion, the laborer, the employee, always has the advantage of deciding whom he wishes to work for. V'yesh cholkim usvir lahu dedavke hecha dechoser bistam rashai detalinan sheno chafetz la'avod yoser. But there's another opinion that states that you're only allowed, an employee is only allowed to quit in the middle of a job is if he doesn't want to work anymore. He's decided he doesn't wish to continue laboring in this particular industry or this particular kind of work. Aval im choser kidei la'avod etzel acher eino rashai. Ve'al kol panim yado ala tachtona. But if he's doing it because he wants to work for somebody else and stay in that same line of work, that he's not permitted to do, and he's at a disadvantage. And the Rama writes that, let's say a guy backs out of a deal because he wants to get paid more, even after they've already agreed on terms, then that's not something that you have to reckon with. The guy does not have a right to pull out and hold the employer hostage to get paid more money. He says, and it's not clear how we paskin. And he says, I refer you to the Chazon Ish, who has a much lengthier discussion on this topic. Okay, a little bit more to discuss. Maybe we'll continue this Imrei Yaakov tomorrow as well, in chapter 11 of the Shulchan Aruch Harav.
But one curiosity for tomorrow is, can you force someone to sign a clause that they won't go to a competitor when they leave you? Are you allowed to do that? Non-compete clause.
Right. A non-compete clause. Again, you see, that's why I wanted to make a point of saying that we're dealing with unskilled labor, where there doesn't seem to be a work product that you have to be so concerned about. When we're dealing with skilled labor, many times this halacha will change completely from black to white, from top to bottom, because of the non-compete issues, and because it's a specialized type of work where there's clearly significant loss if a lot of time and effort was invested in the employee to train him to a specialized type of work where there's intellectual property involved, and so forth and so on.
I bring it up because the rabbi mentioned the .com situation, so that's a prime example.
Yeah, you're right, 100%. Okay. We'll hold it here for today, Rabbi Isai.
Be well, gentlemen.
Wonderful day.